Hi, I'm John, and to celebrate America's birthday this year, I wanted to take a break from Dragon Ball and work on the hero that represents America best.
Look!
Spider-Man. Yep, that's right, Spider-Man. The only superhero that swings past an American flag in his trilogy of movies. Well, at least the best trilogy. And the figure I'm using today is a Sega Luminasta Spider-Man that I imported from Japan. I was really excited when I saw the box art for this figure, but when I received it, it was a little bit smaller than I expected, but even less impressive was the paint. The sculpt was really well done, but the red and blue were incredibly dull, and there was no shading on the figure at all. So let's see what I can do to bring out the best in this figure. First, I needed to make some spider not this time. The figure was relatively separated out of the box, so I decided to paint it as is. I started by priming Spidey with some black Vallejo primer. I figured it was worth a shot to prime the figure black, so I wouldn't have to paint in the webbing lines later on. And if it didn't work out, it should still help me give the figure a little extra depth as I layer on some more paint. This looks a little bit familiar. Anyway, moving on to base coating the figure, I started with the blue sections of his legs with a mix of flat blue and black. And then did the same for his torso, carefully working my way around the web sections to avoid any color contamination once I paint on the reds. Next, I painted in the web sections using a mix of black red and bloody red. I started with his boots and moved up to his upper body, going from the head, chest, the logo on the back, and his arms. When painting on the base coat, a lot of red paint was going into the webbing grooves, so at this point I already gave up on my initial thoughts to not paint in the webbing. But it was worth a shot. Moving on to adding highlights, I dry brushed on all of the raised musculature, starting with his lower body and his upper body using some royal blue. I try to keep the shading and highlights around 3 to 4 shades apart to really give it that extra emphasis, and I really think it made the sculpt shine through. Next, I added highlights to the red sections of his costume using some bloody red. For some of the smaller areas that my dry brush was too large for, like the bottom of his torso, I applied highlights using a small flat-edged paintbrush, wiping excess off of the paintbrush tip and brushing very lightly. Then, to add some extra separation between the sections of his costume, I painted the edges of the red areas with some bloody red and went over some of the blue areas again with some royal blue. After the paint dried completely, the red color came out a little bit darker than I expected, I suppose as a side effect of priming the figure black. So I dry brushed another layer on the entire figure again, this time with a brighter shade of red called Vermillion. Next up, I painted the eyes using several layers of white. I added in some flow improver to the white paint, which helps slow down the drying time, levels out the layers, and leaves it with a smoother finish at the end, even after a bunch of paint applications. While that took its time drying, I started painting in the spider on his chest using some black. I was pleasantly surprised that it was sculpted on, so it made it easier to paint on for sure. After the whites of his eyes were fully dried, it was time to paint on the frames of his eyes using some black paint. With that out of the way, it was time to move on to the finer details. To fill in all of the webbing, I used one of my favorite detailing products, Black Tamiya panel liner. It was really fortunate that the webbing was sculpted into the figure, otherwise I would have had a much harder time doing this. As always, the great thing about panel liners is that since they're enamel based, once I go in to clean up the lines up with some enamel thinner, it won't mess up any of the work I did with the acrylic paint, which is water based. Next, I did a black wash using a mix of black Tamiya panel liner and X20 thinner on some of the deeper muscle crevices and along the edges of his red and blue sections of his costume, just to give it a little extra shading. And I can't forget about the web. This was pretty plain too, so I decided to use some gray Tamiya panel liner in all the divots and knots in the webs to give it a little extra definition. Next was to clean up all the messy line work that I did with the panel liner, so I used some Tamiya X20 thinner and a pointed Q-tip along the entire web, as well as all of the web lines on Spidey's costume. All I had to do was put it back together, and I also added some glossy varnish to his eyes to change up the texture from the rest of his costume. And that was it. Here's how it looked before. And here's the final product. I'm really happy with how Spidey turned out. I was lucky that the sculpting was really well done on the figure, otherwise my job would have been a lot harder. I think the deep shading really invokes more of a comic book feel. I was tempted to use some UV resin on his eyes like I have been on my past few customs, but I decided to restrain myself this time around. Let me know what you think in the comments. Of course, special thanks to my Buy Me a Coffee members. If you want to check out my membership for some behind-the-scenes photos, videos, and member-only polls, please check out the video description for my page on buymeacoffee.com. Also, as always, I have everything I used in the description below as Amazon affiliate links. I don't think they sell this figure in the US, so if you're interested in buying it, I would import it using eBay or a proxy service like Bashman Collectibles. Submit a free inquiry on their website listing the figure or anything else you might want from Japan, including painting supplies, snacks, Gundams, whatever. Just mention John's Hobby Room in the How Did You Hear About It section. As of this video, they are not a sponsor, but I know the team, they're great people, and I'm really happy with their service. So check them out. If you like this video, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe for more. If you're interested in getting started in customizing your own figures, feel free to ask any questions in the comments, and I'll try my best to help. Thanks for watching.
See you, chump. What the hell?
See you next time.